So I was going to lead off with the first question, Dawn, and that is, you talk a lot about the water skiing and you talk about the East Goose. So there is water skiing that takes place, but not to the extent of what we have on West Goose. Are the ski otters they're not on East Goose, I take it?
They're in West.
They're only on West Goose, right?
Well,
Right.
we'll
But there's an
defer to the experts here.
there's an inflatable course on East Goose that's owned by a resident.
Okay, so, the other question I have is, you had, how many respondents was there? There's 47 residents around the lake, and there was 9 respondents, was that, or was that?
Yep, 9 individuals responded.
Okay, so just a small percentage of the people responded, but,
Yep.
okay. I will open up to the board for comments or questions of Dawn.
Very thorough.
Oh, thank you.
You have a question? Yeah.
So the bullhead question, so we treated for bullheads, but they're sort of back, so would that be something we would do first or
They were never
simultaneously?
removed. It's about keeping the population level low enough that we can get the water quality impacts that we want.
So is bullheads part of the plan or just ongoing or?
The study that was done in 2017 said that the removal was sustainable, at least so far. Continued maintenance of that is going to be important too, yes, but so far, the recommendation from the scientist was that that had been effective.
Okay.
They're still in the lake. We know that they're still in the lake, but there's been a reduction in the population by 75%.
So what's wrong with just taking that pH down so low that we kill everything in that lake?
It releases aluminum from the molecule that it's bound to in the alum treatment. and
So it's
then
not
it-
a fish and wildlife, it's a chemical
It's a
issue.
chemical
Okay.
effect, yep.
So that's why we have to watch the pH.
There was some discussion of, instead of alum, lime, using lime, was that just the brainstorming, it's cheaper?
Spent lime is being used on Oak Knoll Pond as part of a test, but it hasn't been done full lake in our area. It was done on Sucker Lake in the 90s, but has not been continued. So results of that study might say that spent lime might be a good maintenance strategy if it's effective in the pond. They're testing, Bar Engineering is testing a pond in our watershed, Oak Knoll, and one in Ramsey, Washington Metro also.
Does the lime act in a similar way, like a bond with similar issues with sediment
does.
and motors and everything
Yeah.
else? We'd have some of the same problems if we did a lime treatment instead of an alum?
Yes. It might be easier to do it more frequently if we could get the delivery to be economically viable. When they did it in Sucker Lake, it's from a report from St. Paul Regional Water Service. They discontinued because they found it too expensive. But Bar Engineering, with their test, if they've got a new delivery system, and they haven't quite figured out what their delivery system is going to be yet. This is their grant, so we're supporting by hosting the pond and their access, but Bar Engineering is actually in charge of that research project. It's a possibility for the future, but not one that we know would be economically viable.
Okay, thank you.
Any thoughts on well, there's 2 parts that we're being asked of, and one is to give some direction to White Bear Lake. Any thoughts on a measure here? I mean, we had the things presented be, no treatment, no boating, no large speed boats, no no boating until the following. Any one of those of interest that we can give direction to the city of White Bear on?
I'm more concerned that out of 47 people, only 9 are interested in this.
Okay, I will open it up, so go ahead if you want to. No, go ahead, talk.
If you want to come up to the microphone, you can.
Yeah,
also.
come on up to the microphone so we can hear you, because we,
Wanted to answer that inquiry.
Oh.
There's actually
Could,
only 19.
excuse me, could you please give your name and address?
Sure, sorry. I'm Lindsay Carpenter, and I live on East Goose Lake, 1947 Rishworth Lane
Okay.
in White Bear Lake. And I was going to wait till public comment, but I just wanted to help him with that question because I was wondering about that. There's 19 residents on East Goose Lake, so 19 properties on East Goose. So yeah, I was confused when I heard that it went to 47 residents, because of those 47, only 19 would have had lake property. So out of the 19, it sounds like 9 responded, And I was one that was actually canvassing and talking to all my neighbors to kind of get the feel and inform them of what was going on here. And I can tell you that there's a couple of vacant lots included too. So yeah, only 19.
Well, 50% is better
Yeah.
than,
Yeah, than what it looked like, 47
Right.
to 9.
right,
Yeah.
okay, all right.
So I can wait till
Okay,
public comment.
all right. Any other, like I said, any direction for White Bear Lake?
Are any of our grants expiring? Is there a deadline or urgency?
The window
Yes.
for applying for the grant for this year will open probably by next week, and we'll go through sometime in August, and then the next round would be in another year.
Usually terms are 3 years.
Yeah, and then they're
It
good for
depends on the
3
grant.
years
We don't
after
have the
that,
RFP, but-
usually.
So it's
Just
now or
get the
3
work
years
done.
from now?
Oh, no, if we were awarded the grant this year, we would need to complete all activity on it in 3 years
Oh,
total.
within, okay.
Within 3
Yeah.
years.
So we can go ahead with the grant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you went a little fast on the question of what if we do nothing specifically? Can you just elaborate on, I get if we do nothing in terms of the algae growth in the lake and with the lake, but downstream, other water affected, drinking water, can you just elaborate on that?
Maybe I could ask
Maybe
others
bring
who
the slide
have been
back
here
up.
longer to
Oh.
talk about the history of toxic algae blooms on Goose Lake.
I am aware of at least one blue-green algae bloom that we've had on the lake where we found the cyanobacteria, and it was identified by the St. Paul Regional Water Service Lab. I reported it to the MPCA, and then we got a big wind and rainstorm, which is very effective at breaking that up, actually, and so we did not have to post the lake as closed. And since then, we've been, I can throw it over to Brian and Tyler, I know it's green out there now, but how green? That was, the picture you saw was of Brian with the paddle going through there. It's pretty green. Any other comments, folks?
We don't specifically test for it. I mean, it's green, it's soupy, but we can't say one way or the other whether that was blue-green algae or not without confirming it through tests, and we haven't done that.
There is a lot of work where people are trying to be predictive about toxic algae blooms and saying where are they going to occur, when, and they find that even on an individual lake, it's very difficult to predict because there's a bit of randomness in when they seem to occur, and the patchiness is also true. It doesn't mean that an entire lake will have a toxic algae bloom. It might be in a bay, it might blow across the bay. So it's a topic of extreme interest right now in research, but there's a lot more so we can't say like we should test on a particular week because we know it's likely to occur. We don't have that kind of resolution with it.
So that's in the lake itself. What about, if I'm trying to explain to people in White Bear Lake why this is necessary, why this is important, you can look at the lake itself and say, we want to clean up that lake, that's good. Other waterways, other lakes, downstream, drinking water, I think you mentioned it in one of the slides. What is the threat if I were to tell people in White Bear Lake, we want to clean it up because we don't want this spreading?
The route the water takes is from East Goose through the culvert underneath Highway 61 to West Goose into Lambert Creek, which then meanders through Vadnais Heights, White Bear Township and Vadnais Heights, and makes its way eventually into East Vadnais, which is the St. Paul Water Reservoir. So that's the sequence, but again, I just know the directions, I know what's what.
What bad stuff would go, and what would that look like?
The cyanobacteria, it can be cleaned from the water. If you got something ready.
I'd
it's
just like
okay.
to add, since we do work closely with St. Paul Water Service, I'm informed that up to 21% of East Vadnais is from the watershed and not the Mississippi connection. So part of that 21% is East Goose draining in. So just adding that for a little bit of context.
East Goose and the rest of the wetlands, yeah.
Right.
The cyanobacteria can be removed. I put this slide back up, but it requires additional treatment, and it can be quite expensive if it's frequent.
So that's the fear, that's the worry, the concern. That'll get down, work its way through.
Yeah, and also, I mean, for people recreating in the lake, and if pets are drinking in the lake, it's not a healthy place to be.
I guess I have a couple questions for the residents.
Okay, well, on that, we'll open up for public comment if anybody wants
If
to.
I could give them to them.
Sure, go ahead.
I mean,
As they come up, I could add the 47, as I went across the road, so there are some homes where they're within view of the lake. I didn't go very far away from the lake, but obviously it is more people than own Lakeshore directly.
okay, 3 points. Why wouldn't you want to improve your lake quality? One. This land of 10,000 lakes, relocation is possible
Or the ski otters, you mean.
for the ski owners. And it's absolutely criminal to bring sand into that lake, and I will not allow that to happen anymore without notifying the DNR.
And that's on West Goose.
Yeah, you just can't do that. That's wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, we cannot allow that as a board to
Right.
continue.
The city has been working on that also.
Well, boom, it stops. That's not allowed.
But
And if-
our resident is representing East Goose Lake, so just to.
I know, but
Just to
it's,
clarify.
they're kind of connected.
They are connected, right.
Okay,
But,
those are my questions
okay.
after watching.
So-
And I'm a big fan of ski otters. I've had family and friends there. But, you know,
Thank you. Well, I will start by addressing what you said. My name's Lindsay Carpenter, like I said before, and I do live on East Lake, Goose Lake. So today, being prepared to talk about East Goose, as they said that West Goose has been removed from the concerned list, is basically, or there's not an interest in treating over
According
at
to
West?
DNR, West Goose is an unnamed wetland. It's not listed on the impaired waters list.
Okay.
Because wetlands aren't. That's just a little technical glitch, that's more. It's not-
Okay, so yeah, I wasn't really clear why the picture of sand, and I don't know what year that photo was taken. I'm not sure
This
why
year.
that was included.
That was from this year, because the city of White Bear Lake is working on this right now, and these are inputs that are going into, obviously, as it's flowing into West Goose, it's also flowing into East Goose. And the sand has been a repeated occurrence over a number of years, where the city has been working to intervene and finding that permits aren't being pulled, and it's happening all of a sudden. People drive by and the sand is there, and
this body
a
can
lot of
stop
people are
that.
concerned about that.
This body can stop that.
but anyways.
Okay,
Talk about East
moving
Goose.
on, like I
Ah.
said, I guess I was prepared to talk about East Goose Lake,
Right.
not West Goose Lake or the ski otters, to be honest with you, so I think I'll put that aside. As far as quality of lake, yes, we do want the quality of our lake to improve, of course. And actually, I'll share a little bit about myself. Myself and my husband, Kurt Carpenter, has been very involved with Valmo for a long time. I was trying to think how long it's been, probably about 15 years
Yeah.
of letting Valmo use our property to do their testing of the water, to launch their boats. My husband and I actually moved from one side of East Goose Lake to the other side of East Goose Lake, and we have let Valmo use our property on both properties to launch boats, to do water testing. So we have been a supporter of this group. Kurt knows a lot more about it than I do. I was telling Stephanie, unfortunately, he's on a business trip right now, so that's why he couldn't be here. So he knows a lot more about it and has worked hand in hand with the staff here before, and they've used our property many, many times. So yes, we do have an interest in having quality lake, and we're working with you guys. It's just, the Alum treatment, well, a few things. Sorry, I'm kind of overwhelmed. It's like so many things and how to zero it in. I think I'll start with, just going kind of through my bullet points as far as the Alum treatment. As we did more research and reading materials, we've kind of changed our position of, at first we were thinking, we want to support you guys and we'll support this if you're thinking the Alum treatment. But we don't want to have restrictions with the boats. We feel that there's not actual evidence showing that the motorboats would cause a problem with the lake or would cause the Alum treatment not to work. And I'll circle back to that. But to be honest with you, as we read more and took more of it in, we've kind of switched our stance from just fighting restrictions of the boats to saying, you know what, we don't think the Alum treatment is the right thing. So as residents and residents that I've talked to, we don't feel that the loom treatment is the right one, and I'll just kind of go through a few bullet points of that. It feels as we read more data that the loom treatment is more of a Band-Aid. It's not going to be a long-term fix. Circling back to the bullheads, and just giving a little bit of background, for me, the timing of all this has been a little strange because really we've seen our lake improve a lot. The pictures of being really, really green. If you were talking to me about 10 years ago about, okay, let's do a loom treatment, this is really bad, look at this green, 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 I'd be saying, yes, yes, let's do it. Right now, it's kind of like, well, actually, our lake is the best it's ever been. And I guess I want to give a little bit of background that Goose Lake has really improved with the use and with the boats. When you look at just common sense and actual observations for those of us who are there and living there day in, day out, we have seen improvement. Goose Lake used to be just a stagnant swamp, really. And then as it was being used in more boats, it has cleaned up. And you can see that when you compare the two sides, circling back to west versus east. On West Goose Lake, where the ski team is, where there's a lot more boat traffic, it's a lot more clean. You do not see that green. You never see that green, thick, thick stuff on that side. It appears cleaner, and residents would attest to that. Where on our side, the East Goose, where there's not as much boat traffic, we tend to get a little bit green, but we notice it with weather. We're noticing it with rain. We feel like a big part of this is a runoff issue. During runoff, that's when it gets really green and when the storms come in, and that's when it gets thick. There was the Bullhead project, and we saw it really clean up from that, and that's consistent with what Don was saying. After the bullheads, the removal, we saw improvement of East Goose, and that's why, again, this timing of spending $170,000 on a loom treatment, to me, the timing feels weird, because like I said, if it was 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, I think I'd feel differently, because I'd be saying the quality's not there. But really, it has been improving, and it did improve with the removal of the bullheads. Granted, in talking to my neighbors, which from the Valmo letter, that's what started that, it sounds like the bullheads are back in full force, is what I'm getting back from people as I'm talking to them. I don't see it as much in front of my own property, but I've been talking to the residents down the way, and they're saying that the bullheads are thick, thick, thick. They feel like it's back in full force. Of course, they haven't done testing with numbers yet, but they feel the bullheads are back in full force, and that did help to clean up, but now that problem's back. So it's kind of, do we do a loom treatment when it feels to the residents, and they're showing packs and packs and packs of dead bullheads, that the bullhead problem is back, and that they're going to be stirring up the bottom as they always have. Let's see, just looking at the studies, and of course, some of Don's slides were new to me, so I haven't had a chance to really take all of them in. But when we were looking at it, it looked like the loom really does not address the PCB contamination or the high levels of lead, zinc, and just the prior sewage discharge being an issue. It doesn't address the runoff issue and what we're seeing post-rain. The bullheads that are back in full force. It's funny, Dawn brought up the Half Moon Lake in Wisconsin, and actually my husband Kurt did reach out to that ski team and the water skiers there to find out what all had happened. And what they reported, again, we'd have to dig in further, but their reports were that the loom treatment did not work. And that's why they're continuing to try it, but that lake still has major problems with phosphorus, and it didn't work. So it just keeps circling back to this Band-Aid, where really, if we're concerned about the phosphorus and how much phosphorus there is in that bottom, and again, I'm not a scientist by trade, but doing my best here, why not look into dredging or more of a permanent solution versus the loom treatment, which is going to be a Band-Aid? And I think it's admitted that it's a Band-Aid, because we're like, well, average, mean, it could work 5 years. I mean, $170,000 is a lot of money for something that could work 5 years. So we're more thinking of big picture, and a permanent fix is what we'd love to see for quality and for the community in the area. One other question Kurt had, and again, he would be the better one to talk on this, but he was curious about the results of the test application that you guys were doing on a smaller body of water, and he's kind of saying, well, why not wait and see if that's a viable option and it's more affordable? So that's what I've got. I mean, in talking to the residents, everyone, I told Stephanie, I think that I was pleasantly surprised that all the community that I talked to had just a strong sense of, hey, we support you guys. We do support the water sports. We want this to be a usable lake. We think our property value is better, like our friends on White Bear Lake across the way, that you can use this lake, you can be on it. We've seen it clean up. I had neighbors tell me I've lived right here for 50, 60 years, and it has cleaned up. And we think that the boats have been a good thing and brought a lot to the community, hand in hand with the ski team and the residents of East Goose Lake that do enjoy that lake. So we don't want to see restrictions put on our lake on the boats. We don't feel that there's enough strong evidence to say that the boats would cause further problem when you look at everything as a whole. And we're just thinking that the loom treatment really isn't the right one for the expense. Couple little corrections I wanted to make on the last slide that shows the votes and how the voting came up. I just wanted to point out that other no treatment was not an option. I have the letter here.
That was a write-in.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm like, that was not an option. Okay. And then the one voted for 2. That would have been me, but why does it say both no wake options?
They voted for no wake, no boating next year, or no wake, no boating until the following June.
Yes, and so I just wanted to make clear that those were the only options. There was not the option to have no restrictions on boats, because otherwise I think that would have been the strong response. But that's all I got. Any questions?
Of the,
Go ahead.
of the 19 residents that are on the lake, does everyone have a boat and use it?
No, on East Goose, there's 19 residents and there's 4 ski boats. And then there is one neighbor, so a fifth, a pontoon and a jet ski. So I would say there's 6 residents that are using the boat in a motorized capacity.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right. Anybody else, or? Go ahead. We do have other items on our agenda, so I will ask you to be brief.
Yeah, real quickly, Mike Laughlin, I live on Goose Lake, 4191 White Bear Avenue. I just want to say, I think 2 biggest problems I would say is the runoff, big time. You know, whenever you see like a rain or something, I don't know if it's from fertilization or what, Puller Chev, I know they fertilize a lot. You can see a lot of the green in their little slough area there, and that kind of goes all throughout the lake. So runoff is a huge issue, I would say, for the green algae. Also, after the bullhead roundup, I think that made a huge difference. You know, the next year I could see a really, really big difference there. And Lindsay's right. This year in particular, all the baby bullheads, just swarms and swarms of them again. So to me, I think that makes a big difference, you know, them kind of mixing up the sediment and stuff like that. So that's just my 2 cents.
Okay,
There's a
That may be a
behavioral
good- I'm
response.
sorry?
There's a behavioral response that's normal for bullheads, that the young school
Yeah,
together.
yeah.
The dad
But it's funny,
defends
you
them,
look off the
and
deck
then,
there, you can just see like 20 just swarms
but
of
they're
them all
schooling.
around.
Yep, and
that-
that's going to happen
so-
in early
Yeah, so that
spring.
might be something to consider, maybe every couple of years, trying to keep that under, whatever. And then maybe possibly if, you know, we're worried about boats stirring up the sediment, maybe just restrict, you know, how close to the shoreline, because from what I've analyzed, it seems like a perfect basin, our lake. We're right down the middle, it's the deepest.
Right.
So, just my thought.
okay,
All right,
thank you.
thanks.
All right. Well, we are tasked with a couple of different action items on this. We need to authorize the pursuit of the grant, and we need to give our recommendation to the city of White Bear Lake. So, on that, I will open it back up to the board for discussion on whether or not the Velamo should apply for the grant. And we'll start with that one. The window is coming up, and the window will close before our next meeting, so we need to decide that tonight.
And then will that come back up again next year?
We never know for sure.
We never know for sure. It kinda
Bowser
depends.
doesn't know for sure.
Yeah.
It is likely to come up
It's
again.
likely.
Well, my thought is, if we're gonna do this, you can't have boat traffic, because if the lake's only 7 feet deep, and even a 10-horse is gonna throw prop wash and mess with the bottom. So if we do it, there's no boating. I kind of it's gotta be a given. But now I'm hearing, if there's only 19 residents and only 8 or 9 have boats on the lake, And if they think it's cleaning up just by eliminating bullheads, I don't see why we just don't do that again and try it. If we can pull for this grant next year, are we pulling the trigger too quick?
We do have documented phosphorus levels in the lake.
And chlorophyll A, which usually is used as a measure of algae.
If I understood
which-
what you said earlier, we can pull the grant and we have 3 years to use it.
To complete implementation. We couldn't wait till the third year to do a first half dose, for example.
But we could pull the grant and do some more research and do it next year and still have enough time.
That would be viable, yes. The BMP question is a good one about external load, and the city of White Bear Lake has been very aggressively involved, especially with Polar Chev, because that was also a priority identified in our water plan, that
that's a good point.
BMPs are needed there, and that is part of their reconstruction that is going on this summer to add a couple of sand iron filters to remove the delta that they have put into the lake from snow removal. And there's one more part of that. Shoreline
BNP,
stabilization.
can you help me?
Best management practices for water quality, yeah.
So if you see something that looks like a sand blanket on Goose Lake, it's a sand iron filter.
Those are going in this summer, and part of reducing the external load is what Bowser wants to see in getting ready to do the alum treatment. So all of these other things, the bullhead removal, BMPs in the subshed, needed to be in place before we could propose to do an alum treatment.
And, you know, if you put a pile of snow in the lake with sand, that's as bad as bringing in a, so are we on top of that, making sure that that snow doesn't go in the lake?
Yes, the city is working very closely on that.
Okay. Rob, any?
I guess my only comments are, we have homeowners, and some of the things we're talking about can and will affect them personally. At a level of concern, I guess I'm gonna err on the side of the homeowner, number one, because I haven't done the homework to identify Half Moon Lake and these other individual lakes or associations that have done the testing. That's not to second guess anything that staff has come up with, but so many times I live in a area where we have quite a few interconnecting waterways, if you will, that are pretty much contained by culverts going around. But so much of it has to do with, you know, the problems that we see are people thinking they can landscape it right down to the water instead of having natural buffers. There's so many different things that are happening that it ends up being just a treatment, and it's like a waste, you know. The water is an extremely important quality for them that live on it, and in the area that I'm talking about in particular, they're large bodies of ponds, if you will, or runoff waters. But the runoff and things like that, you can see that happening. But I'd be more inclined to be a little more reserved in our thought and process of a grant, whether, I'm sorry, a grant is a grant. It's money we're paying somehow, and we're just trying to get the money to use it. You know, as long as we got to pay it, we might as well get the money to use it. And I agree with that. But I'd be hesitant, and I'd be more on the ear of the resident at this time.
Okay. Bill?
Just more questions on implementation. Does the staff, I mean, staff recommendation is treat it, no boating. This wake idea, this 200 feet from shore, I mean, it seems like a shallow lake across the board. Is the science good enough there? Would it work? I mean, where I stand is, you know, this lake is in my city. It's actually in my ward too. I mean, this is my ward, but there's a great case to make to clean the lake. If we're gonna do it and spend the money, then we gotta do it right, and it should work. So if we spend the money, get the grant, do it, then we ought to restrict the boating to a level that actually works with the science. And there might be a tipping point there where, and I don't know what my colleagues are gonna say, you know, we can do this tonight, and then the White Bear Lake City Council have to decide whether we do an ordinance.
We're just giving you
Right.
our
Right.
opinions
So we can't
to
predict
help your decisions.
where that tipping point is between desire to clean up the lake, you know, restricting boat use on the lake. So I guess my questions are, that's one question, just does that wake idea even work? You put it as an option.
As we have approached this project, we wanted to be able to pursue a no-wake zone as a viable option. The science does not support it very well. We feel that it could be a possibility with increased monitoring, but that increased monitoring would mean that if the phosphorus levels are climbing, it would be closed to motorized boat traffic. The science really says that the boats are a problem.
Probably won't work. There's
And
not
I went
enough of a
into
deep
it
end
as
there.
deep as I could and contacted everybody because I didn't know the answers going in. And we felt like a no-wake zone was a pretty nice compromise that would allow recreation while we see and measure what's happening. It doesn't hold up very well with the literature.
Then the second piece is then, what does it look like? We're gonna treat in the fall, and then the following summer, no boats. That's, this, if you do it the right way, you're suggesting. Treat in the fall, so summer off, and then another year goes by. And that next summer, are we boating?
The second half of the dose would be installed in year 3.
Right, so what about year 2?
Year 2 would be the rest year. So if the treatment first half dose was done in the fall, the next year, a quote from our engineer, ideally would be no boat traffic. With another installment in year 3, ideally no boat traffic in year 4. That's from the engineer. Stephanie had another alternative that she thought of that could reduce it down to 3 years. But we're still talking of about a 3 to 4 year window. And we want to be very open about that and clear.
That's gonna be 2 out of the 4 years, no boating on the lake, really.
No, it's all four.
All four.
No boating.
Except that, so the first summer, because the treatment would be in the fall, that
Through
year
the
would
fall.
not
Okay, so 3.
require no more.
Following summer, no boating, and then
A rest
A
year.
treatment.
And then a treatment.
rest treatment means no boating as well. That's what I'm getting confused. So in the interim year, where we're not treating, we're not boating either. And then treat again, and then no boating again. So it really is a 4-year window. If we restrict motorized boats on that lake, it's gonna be a 4-year window if you really wanna do it the right way.
With the fall treatment, I guess the minimum would be a
3.5.
3 year window.
Yeah.
Yeah.
3 seasons.
Now, are we discussing going ahead with the grant or going ahead with the project?
Going ahead and applying for the grant is the item before us tonight.
And a recommendation to the city of White Bear Lake.
And recommend a recommendation of our advice to the city of White Bear Lake. So we're not advocating going for the project tonight, we are just going for the grant tonight. One more. Oh,
Can I have this young lady come up again?
I had just had a quick question. Don, when you said our engineer says, I think that was the data that Kurt kept asking for and we never got it emailed to us. Is that a report of your engineer who has laid out why that's the position
the
and using data and science?
Feasibility study?
The report is posted on our website.
Yeah, I'd have to check, I guess. Do you remember if it's on there or not? You'd have to check too, sorry.
Okay, because that's something we kept requesting, because when Kurt met with Don and Stephanie, he was asking for, all data, all science.
Yeah.
What is the engineer saying? What's he relying on? And just, we kind of make the argument that you could find engineers that are going to say the exact opposite, really. Just because there's not enough, as Don said, not enough science that's saying that it's the boats and that the boats would cause the problem.
Well, the science says that the boats were hard to model, but 114 studies, the science is pretty clear on alum treatments.
Okay, on the alum treatment. Well,
Rob, you
I
have-
mean, because the other, one study said that the weather is just as hard as the boats, as far as the rain and wind stirring it up.
okay.
So-
At this point, I'm going to call off public comment. And Rob, you have a,
The last question I was going to have or present was the fact that we're talking about these things, again, the grant idea. The reservation in my mind is there's a strength in the reservation just because of, number one, the families involved. And I believe that it's clearly been stated, and again, I don't know the facts, but if there's 19 homeowners on the lake and you all have a need to want to see your property values move up, obviously, with the treatment of the lake or the water qualities, I mean, that would enhance the values. But it does take and come at a sacrifice of the families. And I guess, again, I guess I just I'll just respectfully say again, I just a little more reserved in that area. And that's not to second guess anything that the staff has done, by any
Yeah,
means.
there is continued use on West Goose, and White Bear Lake is not very far away. We have thought of that too, but your boats are directly on East Goose. We recognize that too.
My comment is quick. I have an issue with kicking the can down the road. It's going to become more expensive as we go deeper into this. The comment came up, can we dredge? I can only imagine what dredging would cost. It's not in our budget.
Other zero on it.
Yeah,
at least.
right. It
Homo
would-
Lake has just gone through a similar
Yeah.
process. They compared dredging versus alum treatment. They are also going forward with alum treatment. They have curly leaf, and they're going forward with
Rob does
control of
bring up a
curly
good
leaf.
point. I have a cabin in northwestern Wisconsin, and the county up there has enacted a shoreland preservation plan where you can get a $50 rebate on your, refund on your property taxes for, not developing all the way down to the lake. You preserve natural shorelines. It would be nice if Minnesota or, if Lamo or something came up with some type of a program like that or similar. So those are my two comments. Any final comments before we?
Well, it's about transparency, and I certainly appreciate the scientific, the information you gave. But these people, like us, just received it tonight, and I think they should have a chance to look into it further, ask questions of the engineer, so that we truly are, I don't see the rush. I see we go for the grant, and we can get started on that, but we can add some further research and transparency by letting, us all work together on.
So our advice to the city of White Bear Lake will be to do more research, to acknowledge that there are some questions still, but that, again, the lake, I looked at, what I was passing around my iPad up here to the board, just a Google Earth photo of Goose, East and West Goose, and you can see the deep blue water of White Bear Lake in the northeast corner of that. And so, the Goose Lake is not a good-looking lake, at least from the area, and I have no idea when that photo was taken, but within the last couple of years, Google Earth updates. So it's not a blue water, it's a green lake. And West Goose seems to be a little bit less green than East Goose, but they still look green to me. But anyway, so our advice to White Bear Lake is going to be listen to the residents. It's going to be lean on the staff for more research. Give people a chance to ask questions and to do more research as to what other options might be to this. Does that make sense? Again, just trying to keep some type of open dialogue with the residents and making sure that any final recommendation that goes into this is so rock solid that there is no real opportunity to say it's inconclusive or it's not, there's conflicting opinions.
Well, I don't think there's any question the lake is impaired.
Right.
That's just a given.
Right.
I guess another concern of mine is how big of a health risk? Are we damaging downstream?
Well, and
because
our
we're letting
mission
this lake
is to,
sitting there?
is to maintain the water quality
Right.
throughout the lakes that are in Velamo. So that is our mission, that is the staff's mission, it's why we're here. So keeping that in mind as well is that at some point there might be some
But if the
pain.
residents living right on the lake are noticing something getting better, and we haven't done anything but take out a few bullheads, then you got to kind of wonder,
There have been a number of BMPs added in the subshed to reduce external loading as we prepare for the alum treatment.
okay. And also, has there ever been any talk of restricting any kind of fertilization around the lake or chemicals? Because obviously that's what's coming into the lake from runoff. So, and maybe that's another line, you ban them. You can't be fertilizing next to the lake. And if that's part of the pH count, maybe we can help. There's a number of options. I don't think we've,
Well, we have to stop and contain what has happened for years, to cap it, more or less.
The study that was done by Bar Engineering showed that internal load is the significant contributor of phosphorus in this lake, that the amount of phosphorus that is embedded in the sediment and continues to release is a result of historical inputs, and that is not a problem that we can address by reducing external inputs.
But so if you just stop boating for 4 years without doing anything, does that mean it would stop turning over and coming up?
The phosphorus would continue to go into the water column when the sediment layer is anoxic. So in the summer when it's hot, the phosphorus would
Okay.
continue to release.
Okay. So, we've got some advice for the city of White Bear Lake. Now for advice for our Velamo staff, should they apply for the grant at this point?
I would like,
Okay, so that one we'll need a motion.
I will move that we move forward on the grant application.
Okay.
Just to speak for your colleague, Dan Jones, who's normally in this chair, we talked to him today, and he said he would support going for the grant. That doesn't, prejudice him later as a city councilman in terms of what we're gonna do with the ordinance, but
Because the grant isn't a given. I mean,
Yeah,
we need to
yeah.
apply for it, and other people will apply for their projects, which are equally important to them. So
Right.
we need to.
and I think you said, well, Velamo has a mission and a job to do, and
Yeah.
then we also have one.
Right,
with
so,
our chair, so.
okay, well, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for Velamo staff to apply for the grant. Any comments, questions?
Point of clarification, again, the points have been made, other individuals are going to be trying to utilize the options of getting the grant. The same is true for ourselves. At the end of the day, if there's a decision in particular, let's just say City of White Bear says, well, you know what, we got the grant, but you know what, we're not going to be able to get it done in 3 years or whatever. So then what actually happens if for some reason?
Then the money would go back to Bowser.
It goes back to Bowser.
But there's no penalty.
There's no penalty.
Okay.
No, it just ruins our credibility.
Well, or we might be fair and just say, we're doing a little bit more research, could we have an extension of 6 months? I don't know.
Or we may get to the end of
yeah.
that certain point and say, you know what, at this point, we're not gonna be interested in using the grant. Please utilize it in another direction.
Okay.
I
All
don't
right.
know if that's the case, but.
Well, all right.
We won't know about the grant until December, so there is time for dialogue and discussion and maybe more research.
Well, I would encourage those dialogues to keep happening, and communication and, transparency, the whole works. On that note, I will call the motion on applying for the grant. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. All right, we'll apply for the grant.